All right. Welcome everybody. It's so great to have you all joining us for Skyrocket Education's highly effective instructional coaching webinar. Like I said, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see everyone virtually. My name is Amy Blesha. I'm the Director of Instructional Leadership, and this is
Elisa Oliver. I'm an instructional leadership coach here with Skyrocket. Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you and so excited to jump into this 30-minute quick hit on highly effective instructional coaching. Just for those of you not familiar with Skyrocket, we do a full 2-day PD on our methods of highly effective instructional coaching. So we're going to give you the 30-minute highlight here, but if you want to learn more, if you want to be a part of that 2-day PD, we'll have info at the end to get you tapped into our network. And we're going to kick off today with a little video. If you've worked with Skyrocket before, you might have seen this video, but we want to center ourselves in why highly effective instructional coaching is so important. What sort of impact can it have on teachers and then therefore on students and student outcomes if we are really effective with our instructional coaching and change outcomes in our classroom? So we're going to show you this 10-second clip of a teacher giving a set of directions and just want you to think about what might you coach this teacher on? What are your instincts that are coming up about where this teacher could be more effective from just seeing 10 seconds of them giving directions? So let's check this out.
When I say go and not until I say go, you have 10 seconds to silently get your book from your seat sack and begin working.
You, like me, might have struggled to even internalize and process that in 10 seconds. So we're going to watch it one more time, thinking about what feedback you might give. Where might you coach this teacher?
When I say go and not until I say go, you have 10 seconds to silently get your book from your seat sack and begin working.
Amy, what are you thinking? What might you coach this teacher on?
Well, the first thing I'm thinking about is just the speed in which she was delivering her directions was very quick. So tone, body language, and just the specificity of the directions that she was giving.
Yeah, if it was hard for us as adults to process those directions that quickly, we can imagine, especially the type of directions she was giving seem like they're aimed at younger students, how those students might have trouble processing as well. So we're going to now show you why highly effective instructional coaching matters. This next clip is going to be from 4 minutes later. All this teacher had is 4 minutes of coaching, and I want you really thinking about for this clip, what had to be in place for this level of change to happen in such a short amount of time? Highly effective instructional coaching gets people significantly better at teacher skills in a very short amount of time. So what happened here?
When I say go, you will have 10 seconds to silently get your book from your seat sack and begin reading. Go.
Now that direction was much more clear, but let's watch it one more time just to really look for those changes. Spot the difference. What had to be in place for this level of change to happen in just 4 minutes?
When I say go, you will have 10 seconds to silently get your book from your seat sack and begin reading. Go.
Amy, what do you think? What are some things that
Big
are sticking out
change.
to you?
Big change, big change. The things that are sticking out to me are it is very likely that she got lots of practice, even in that short amount of time, in order to make that significant change in such a short amount of time, lots of reps of practice. And with that said, a really trusting relationship, right? You've got to trust the person that you're
Yeah.
working with. If they're going to say like, again, keep practicing, you've got to
Yeah.
know that like they've got you and your students' best interest in mind.
Absolutely. Multiple reps, trusting relationship. And then when you mention that again, I'm really thinking about that coach being really precise in their feedback
Yeah.
about why we need to do another rep. So that coach coming prepared with a really clear criteria for success of what made that direction better from the first one where the pace was too fast, the directions weren't super clear, they didn't use any signals to reinforce those directions, but having all those components in mind and being able to give a bit of feedback for each rep of like, now let's add this on and add this on, makes those 4 minutes super effective and not just like, oh, I'm basically giving directions the same way with a slight tweak, but this teacher now knows how to give directions in a different way.
Yep.
So with that, Amy's going to take us into our framework, which is our kind of like Bible for how to make this happen, how to make effective change happen in a short amount of time. And Amy, tell us a little more about the framework.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. Elisa's actually going to drop the a link for the framework in the chat for everyone, or the Q&A section, wherever you're going to put it there so everyone can access it. It actually brings you right to our website, which also has a host of other resources on there. So like Elisa said, this is kind of like our bread and butter. This is our Bible in terms of how do we ensure that we are effectively coaching teachers. This is our teacher coaching framework right here. And so I want to just walk you through this framework a little bit. This really helps us focus in on where are we going to start working with a teacher? What are we working on with teachers to lead to student outcomes? So you'll notice front and center, this is strand 1 right here. We've got strand 2 and strand 3 as the second page of our framework. Each of our strands starts off with a clear student outcome goal. We've got into education. We're all here because we care deeply about students. And so we want to make sure that we keep kiddos front and center, and we're always driving towards a student outcome goal. And you'll notice in strand 1, that goal is all around students being on task, so classroom culture. Now, how do we get kiddos on task? How do we meet that clear student outcome goal? Well, that's where all the teacher actions come into place. So these lead to that achievement, or the achievement of whatever that student outcome goal is. So for example, in strand 1, we're driving towards students being on task, and each of these teacher actions, which are hierarchical in nature, will support with getting more and more and more students on task throughout the entirety of the lesson. The last part of our framework is the rubric for evaluation. How do we make sure that the methods that we're working on, the teacher actions that we're working on with the teachers, are effective? Well, we've got our rubric right at the bottom here to ensure we know when teachers have met mastery or are proficient in that strand, and when they're ready to move on to the next strand, which in this case would be content mastery, and the last one would be rigor. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, how do I even know where to start? Right? We're talking about making big change in a short amount of time. How do we know where to start with teachers? Well, that leads us into our approach to teacher coaching. So there's 3 buckets to our approach to teacher coaching. The first one is classroom analysis, getting into a classroom, collecting data, and identifying what's the first step. Then we've got our coaching meetings that come next. And then last is real-time coaching. We're going to hit in small chunks, like Elisa said, just a sprinkle of classroom analysis and coaching meetings. We don't have enough time today to talk about real-time coaching, but if you want to learn more, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll have lots of contact information at the very end of this session. But let's dive into classroom analysis. So when we're analyzing classrooms, we're looking to identify what's the biggest bang for our buck, basically. What's the biggest lever right now? And what we call that is our big picture soundbite. So when we get into a classroom, when we analyze a classroom, what's the thing we want to start working on now? What's the thing that's going to bring change to student outcomes based on this teacher analysis? And when we think about our big picture soundbite, we think about those student outcomes that you'll see in our framework, as well as teacher actions. We're always thinking about the connection between students are doing or not doing blank because teacher is or is not doing blank. So let's take a look at an example of what a big picture soundbite might sound like and look like once we've analyzed a classroom. So an example of a soundbite, and again, this is tied directly to our framework. Students are not on task, this is strand 1, throughout the lesson because the teacher does not give directions from the front of the room with the attention of the overwhelming majority of students. And you'll notice at the bottom that it says S1 TA6, so this is strand 1, teacher action 6. We noticed when we got into this classroom to collect some data to analyze this classroom that as the teacher was giving directions, she or he was often moving around the classroom, back-facing students, writing something on the board, digging through papers at their desk, and therefore kiddos weren't meeting those expectations because the teacher was not ensuring that all kids were actually focused on the directions that were being given. So with this big picture soundbite, this would be the first thing that we would work on with teachers. But we want to have some data to really support why we're working on this thing with teachers. And so I'm going to pass it back on to Elisa to talk about how to ensure that we gather strong data.
Sure. Thank you, Amy. Yeah. So with that big picture soundbite, it sounds great, but the question is, why is it that soundbite right now? Because likely in that classroom, that teacher had other things that they could work on that might support student outcomes beyond just delivering instructions from the front of the room. So we want to think about two things. One, the fact that our framework is hierarchical in nature. So we want to master some of the earlier skills before we move on to more complex skills or skills that are supported by earlier skills. And we want to gather enough strong data that we can really support kind of our hypothesis here. We're hypothesizing that more students will be on task because that teacher gives directions from the front of the room with the attention of the overwhelming majority of students. So what data leads us to that? Well, I'm going to show you what a data set could look like. Now, this is a very simple one. It is numbers only. However, we do want to encourage you to focus most on what is happening with the students as you hypothesize about what the biggest leverage teacher action is. So for this data set, I'm just going to give the numbers. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to scan over these numbers. You'll see on task in this column and total number of students in this column. And this gives you every 5 minutes they were collecting data and about what part of the lesson we're in. Do now, direct instruction, guided practice, independent practice. Take 30 seconds and see if you know notice any patterns or trends in the data. All right. I used to be a statistics teacher, so I hope what's jumping out to your eyes are kind of these outlier numbers. You see that there's a couple instances in class where the number of students on task falls into the teens, and we know there's 28 students in this room. So the data does start to tell us a story. We see at the beginning that kids were on task as soon as they got in the room, 25 out of 28 students. But within that first 5 minutes, we've lost 7 students. Now we're down to 18 out of 28 on task within the first 5 minutes of class. However, that jumps back up as soon as we start direct instruction. And so we see that almost everybody is on task when we move into the direct instruction from the do now. And then by the end of guided practice, that has been continuously falling until it falls to another low point of 18 out of 28. So even without any quotes from what the teacher said or the directions they gave or any more details about what's going on with the students besides whether they're on task or off task, this data begins to tell a story. And the story that we can tell just from these numbers is that students are not on task throughout the lesson because the teacher does not routinely scan the room to determine if expectations are being met. So even with no additional data points, we can see that there is a pattern happening here, that as each activity goes on, more and more students are off task. And then when we start a new activity, the numbers go right back up. This pattern starts to point us to the fact that the teacher likely is giving clear directions and is scanning or standing at the front of the room at the very start of each activity. But as that activity goes on, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, students are getting off task and there is no redirection or looking for who's on task or off task. So even with no additional information, the first thing we know that's going to have an impact on this classroom is a really good scan. A teacher who is standing at the front of the room or somewhere where they can see all students and looking around the room to see who's there or not. From a really good scan, then we can build on praise or redirection, whatever the students might need to get back on task. But scanning is going to be the first thing, getting the teacher to notice these patterns as they happen, rather than just letting students get off task with no noticing happening until we start the next activity. So gathering strong data looks different in each strand. With strand one, we are really looking at that on task number that you just saw in this example, and we're really looking to collect that every 5 minutes or so, as you saw. This is about counting all students and seeing were students doing the task they were given with the right materials at the right noise level within the allotted time. We get that total on task metric throughout and after every activity, and we get an average for the lesson. But what does this look like in different classrooms? If we walk in a room and 85% of the students are on task or more, and they continue to stay on task, we don't need to focus on any of those strand one teacher actions. That's not going to be our biggest lever because most of the students are on task anyway. So then we start to see if content mastery might be our biggest lever. And when we start to look at content mastery, we want to record the objective. What are students supposed to be learning today? We want to start interviewing students. So instead of standing back in the room and scanning and seeing who's on task, we're actually going to be walking towards students and asking them, what are you learning today? How can you show me that you know that? Why does this objective matter? And we also want to sample student work, whether that's looking, taking pictures, collecting at the end, to see if that work is aligned to the objective. Does it actually measure and test and assess what the objective is aiming towards? And are students demonstrating mastery towards that objective? If it's the beginning of class, we might just want to see the progress of understanding the first step or two. Towards the end of class, we want to see students independently being able to meet the objective in whatever way that looks. So there's a lot more scanning and sampling of student work throughout the lesson in strand two. And then finally, if you walk in a classroom where 85% or more are on task, and when you sample student work and talk to students, 85% or more can show mastery of the academic content, then we move to rigor. And with rigor, we're really looking, are the students carrying the cognitive load of this class because they've already mastered the material or show good progress towards mastery? So in strand three, we're really thinking about what types of questions are being asked, how are students responding, what is the percent of teacher talk versus student talk, and we're recording those thinking tasks throughout the entirety of the instruction. More info on all of this exists in our book, Skyrocket Your Teacher Coaching, as well as in our PD sessions. But there's a quick overview of how to get data that tells a story that your teachers are going to be invested in and see why the big picture soundbite is the most important thing to work on right now. And once you've got that data in the soundbite, you've got to have a meeting. So I'm going to turn it back to Amy for that component.
Awesome. Thanks, Elisa. All right. So like Elisa said, now that we've got some really good data, we know where we want to go with this teacher. We have the soundbite. We have the data set that really tells the story. So we're going to get some buy-in from the teacher of why we're working on the thing we're about to work on. We have to make sure that we are super prepared to execute effective and high quality coaching meeting. So there's essentially 3 parts to a coaching meeting. The first one is preparation, which we're really going to dive into during this webinar. But again, there's more information in our book as well as our website. And you've got our information at the end there if you need some more information. But first and foremost is preparation. So if you think back to that initial video that Elisa showed in the beginning, that teacher, when that teacher had that meeting with the coach had to make sure that they were super prepared so that they were able to execute a high quality and effective coaching meeting in a short amount of time. We say that we could have, and you can have, a high quality, effective coaching meeting in 22 minutes. The first thing we want to think about when we're designing and preparing to execute a high quality coaching meeting is these 3 questions. The first question we want to ask ourselves is, did the teacher just get significantly better at something? In order to be able to answer yes to that question, we have to make sure that we are prepared to execute a meeting that's going to lead to you being able to say yes at the end. Did we get a lot of practice? Was I prepared? Did I have all the data that I needed to really tell a story? The second question that we want to be able to answer yes to is, does your teacher know their next steps? If you ask your teacher at the end of a meeting, hey, what did we work on today and how do you do it? They should be able to answer that question. We worked on clear directions and here's the criteria for success. They should know that they should stand in front of the classroom when they're delivering those directions. They should know exactly what their next steps are. And the third thing is, have you put systems in place to hold yourself and your teachers accountable? Does the teacher know the next time you're going to be in the classroom? Does the teacher know how you're going to be collecting data or what you're going to be collecting data on? Does the teacher know how you're going to effectively support them with real-time coaching when you get into the classroom? And what kind of systems did you put in place to ensure that you're holding teachers accountable for those things as well as yourself? Do you have something in your calendar? Did you send that calendar invite? If you could answer yes to these 3 questions, you're off to a really good start. Next things we want to think about is when we're putting together that agenda is the time pieces of it. How are we effectively spending our time in a coaching meeting? So this is our suggested breakdown in time, and you'll notice that the most amount of time in a coaching meeting is spent on practice. So I want to set up a quick analogy for you. If I signed up for piano lessons and I showed up to learn how to play piano, and my instructor, my professional instructor, piano instructor, just talked to me about the piano the whole time. This is a piano. This is what it looks like. Look at these keys. Some are black, some are white. They make different sounds. You put them together using both of your hands and you will play a song, you will play music. Good luck to you. I would likely not know how to play piano, right? I would not leave there knowing anything other than they make different sounds. I guess I have to put my hands somewhere. If I didn't do any practice, I am not going to learn how to play the piano. I went in there not knowing how to play, and I still don't know how to play. We think about that the same way in our coaching meetings. If the data that we have is supporting and telling us and telling the story that this particular teacher is struggling with providing clear directions for students, we have to assume the best, that they don't know how to do it. It's our job to share with them how to do it and practice it with them. It's not enough to just tell them. It's not enough to just write it down on a piece of paper. We have to practice it, and that's the bulk of the meeting. And we have to make sure that we're prepared with a really effective and efficient practice piece of our meeting. You'll notice there's some other elements to a coaching meeting. We want to check in. We want to know how their kiddo's soccer game was this past weekend. We want to share glows with data. The glows are the great things that are happening that we want them to maintain and keep doing. That's important. We want to share that grow data with them. Hey, here's some data to support why we're working on the thing that we're working on right now. We want to share goals and we want to share some next steps. But again, the biggest bang for your buck in a coaching meeting is really effective, high repetition practice. As I mentioned, we want to set some goals for folks. Again, if I decide I want to play piano, I want to set a goal for myself. I want to learn how to play piano so that I can play my mom's favorite song for her at her next birthday. That's my goal. It's the same thing when we're getting into meetings with folks. We want to have goals for them. What are we working towards? The measurable goals that we set up for folks should focus and prioritize. What specifically are we working on? What's the goal that we're working towards? We want to clearly define what progress looks like. We're starting off with an on-task metric of 47%. Here's how we're going to define what progress looks like. By next week, we're going to get to 65% by working on this one bite-sized teacher action. The following week, we're going to work on this, and here's what we're working towards. The last piece of it is really all around motivation, encouraging, and celebrating. If we started off with 47% of kiddos on task and we set a week goal for 90% on task, I'm not sure that there's going to be any room to motivate, encourage, or celebrate. It's highly unlikely that we're going to get from 47% to 90% in 1 week working on just one teacher action. But if we work on one teacher action, could we get to maybe 65% or 70%? Yeah, we're saving some room there to motivate, encourage, and celebrate. We can get there if we're really effective at our coaching meeting. We get a lot of practice. Yeah, we can get there. We can get 75% of kiddos on task. Let me show you a couple examples of what goals could look like. But I want to first ground it in another piece of data. This one's slightly different than the one that Elisa shared earlier. I'm going to give us 30 seconds to read through this collection of data. All right, I want to just highlight a couple things before I show you some information in terms of sound bites and goals. So I want to draw your attention to a few things. We've got our time on the left, on-task metric, and then teacher actions and student outcomes. You'll notice in the beginning, the first 5-ish minutes of class, our on-task metric is in the 60s. And if you notice the teacher action and supporting outcomes, the routines and procedures are really unclear. When the teacher says in the beginning for kiddos to come in and have a seat, we've got kids wandering around the classroom. We have some that are sitting on the windowsill. There's not really anything set up for students to be successful in the beginning of class because those routines clearly have not been solidified with kiddos. If you'll notice towards the end of this data collection, routines start to get a little bit clearer. We're going to annotate in our books. We're going to use a pen and a highlighter. Once we're finished reading the chapter, we're going to raise a silent hand when we're done. So we've got some clearer expectations there at the end. And you'll note that the on-task metric starts to go up just a little bit. And so with this collection of data, we've identified that the soundbite is that students are not on task, but the teacher has not modeled, created, or habituated equitable expectations for routines. Some, but not all. So this is in strand 1, teacher action 4. And so we know that the thing that we need to work on with this teacher based on this collection of data is ensuring that teacher has created, modeled for kiddos, and habituated expectations for all classroom routines. So the first goal that we want to set is our big goal. Let's say you have a coaching cycle that's somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. By the end of our coaching cycle together, we want to have 90% of students on task throughout the lesson as your average. Now, we're not going to set that goal just for this 1 week. So we're going to have bite-sized goals that match this soundbite. So like I said, we've identified this teacher needs to work on creating and habituating routines. So the first tag or teacher action goal that I would set for this teacher for this 1 week is that teacher will create at least 2 routines with my support, with my coaching, for the start of class, the do now and handing out novels, excuse me, and teach these routines to students. When teacher begins to really get solidly be creating and habituating those routines with students, ideally, that's going to lead to at least 85% of students demonstrating mastery of the start of class routines after the routines are modeled and habituated. You remember from the data that we showed, we weren't that far off. So you might be thinking to yourself, 85%, that's kind of high, but there were points throughout that lesson that teacher did hit 85% of students being on task when the routines were much clearer, had been modeled and clearly habituated, or at least reiterated with students. So this is an idea of what goals could look like in terms of the big goal and then a bite-sized teacher action goal and a student outcome goal that matches that soundbite that you've created based on that strong data that you've collected. I'm going to pass it on to Elisa now to talk about what practice could look like.
Yeah, so once we've got our goals, we've got our agenda, our data, our clear goal of where we're going, how do we practice to get towards that goal? And there's really 2 types of practice we recommend. The first is execution practice, which is going to feel most similar to a sports drill, right? We're going to use execution practice for any kind of skill, teacher action that is very physical. So clear directions, positive praise, redirection, a signal for the classroom, the tone the teacher uses, scanning a room. Most of these skills exist in strand 1 and involve the teacher actually building the muscle memory of how to do that thing. So practice for these skills is going to look like standing up, moving around the classroom, saying the direction over and over, saying the positive praise over and over. And you as the coach are going to be just like a sports coach, standing side by side. So a sports coach for a basketball team might stand next to their player and adjust their elbow or adjust their gaze so that they can hit the shot better the next time. Similarly, in teacher coaching of an execution skill, you're going to stand next to your teacher and help them adjust their body language, their tone, where they stand, how they stand, because these skills are super physical and we have to build the muscle memory of how to do that. On the other hand, some skills are more intellectual, and this is design practice. So, this is like an architect collaborating to build something together. You have to sketch out your design side by side before you execute on it. So, routine scripting, something in that skill sets Amy just mentioned, if the teacher needs to create a do now routine and a routine for handing out novels, they might physically practice how they're going to get students in the room and where they're going to stand to give those directions. But before they execute, they need to design. What do they want it to look like? What is the first thing students should do when they walk in? What happens next? What happens if they finish early? For handing out novels, that teacher had 3 students running to the back of the room. I'm guessing that's not how they would design it. So we can design, I would like to have the student of the week be the one who always goes to the back of the room, or the first person in each row be the one who goes to get their books from the back of the room. But we need to sit like architects and build out the vision of what we want. This also comes up a lot in Strand 2 with objectives, checks for understanding, exemplars, the teacher model. We need to design all of these things. Now, one thing I want to say is design practice does not mean we get away from repetition like execution practice. Still, with design practice, we are practicing one skill over and over again. That skill just might take a little bit longer. So with objectives, we are writing 5 objectives in 15 minutes. We are not writing one objective and then working on the rest of the lesson plan for 15 minutes. That is not going to get a teacher significantly better at writing objectives because we've made the scope of it too big. We wrote one objective with feedback and then went on to the rest of the lesson. Instead, we're going to write multiple objectives and give precise feedback on each of those objectives so that the teacher can walk away feeling like they know how to write a strong objective because they've gotten multiple reps and lots of feedback. And once we've practiced for those 15 minutes, we just need to set some next steps because while 15 minutes can make someone significantly better at a skill, it cannot build to the level of automaticity and mastery that we want for our teachers. So we give them some next steps like an observation on the calendar. Yes, we got to see them practice in a more sanitized, sterile environment of just the 2 of us. We want to see them practice in front of kids. We want to see how this goes in their classroom. How do they give clear directions in front of students? How do they put an objective up on the board and explain what it is and why it matters to kids? So we need to leave meetings with at least one observation on the calendar, hopefully within the next week. Similarly, we want to have our next meeting on the calendar. If we set those goals, when are we going to check back in on them? Again, our recommendation is within 1 week, bite-sized small goals, making sure we're making progress to our big goal. And finally, a deliverable. Just like a piano lesson, if you only practice when you're sitting next to your teacher, you're probably not going to get that much better. I remember getting yelled at by my piano teacher when they could tell I had to practice between lessons. So your deliverable is that additional practice. Of course, they're going to practice in the classroom, but make it more real by having them send you 5 more objectives or send a video of them practicing clear directions or perhaps collecting data on their own of how it went the first time they tried that new routine. It makes them feel more invested in the goals and the process of getting better. And with that, we have some next steps for you. That was our 30-minute overview of our approach to highly effective instructional coaching, but there's so much more to dive into. So if you are interested, Skyrocket offers single school and district or network audits because we know that a positive school culture and highly effective instructional coaching are prerequisites to meeting any of the goals you have for your staff or students. And our team is ready to help you by coming to your school and examining your school culture and instructional practices to offer some feedback on where Skyrocket could fit in with you all, whether it's a PD, individualized coaching, teacher coaching, leader coaching. So if you are curious and want to hear more beyond this 30 minutes, email info@skyrocketed.org. Or you can email me and Amy directly, whether you drop something in the Q&A or want to send us a follow-up. We would love to hear from you and talk about our favorite topic, which is highly effective instructional coaching. So our emails are just our first names at skyrocketed.org, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much for attending. Have a great rest
Enjoy
of your
your
day.
afternoons. Bye.